Now I have the privilege of introducing the Right Reverend Bishop Dagmar Winter, who is the Vice President of the Conference of European Churches, the organization that I also serve. Bishop Dagmar, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Katerina, and thank you to all those who've collaborated to make this event possible, who've worked in the background. Thanks for inviting me to speak, of course, but I want to say thank you also to our interpreters who are making this whole thing possible. Europe, and much of what is good in our society, has its origins in Christian faith and thereby Christian values. This is largely not understood, as has been said more than once, due to religious illiteracy. Our fast-changing culture makes accessing worship, its language, its symbolism, its history, really difficult, and it's incomprehensible to many, whatever their educational level, not least when the framework of perception being pushed onto people is one of consumption and entertainment. Growing religious illiteracy is a result of increasing secularization, more precisely, moving away from a sense of corporate faith and institutional religion, instead moving towards a highly individualized understanding of spirituality. You've just said that. And indeed, a yearning for spirituality. I think this is what Father Manuel was alluding to earlier with the term post-secular. Religious illiteracy also grows very understandably due to the shrill voices at the extremes of our faith, making faith and church both hugely unattractive, but also intellectually entirely unconvincing. At the same time, the failings of the church, historic and present, certainly parts of the church, involvement in slavery, racism, abuse, caving in to become instruments of state, our slowness in taking issues of equality and environmental protection and climate change seriously, all these negatively affect the receptivity to the church. We have every reason to be humble, and there is good precedence for that in our Lord Jesus Christ, imitation of Christ, as you said. The days of deference are over, and since deference is so seductive for us, I think this is no bad thing. We need to earn respect and engage, and perhaps discover with the Apostle St. Paul that when I am weak, I am strong. Strong in the power of Christ rather than in institutional power. In our world, there is the temptation for churches, out of fear and discomfort, and not least under the influence of individualism, to turn inwards, see their role solely as growing their own flock, encouraging them to do good deeds, rather than also espousing the vision of the whole kingdom of God in society and the world. And this inward looking weakens the presence of Christian values in public discourse. I note Professor Kotsiopoulos' dictum that faith is a social event. In 1934, when large parts of the German Protestant church had failed terribly in the face of the Nazi ideology, the Barmen Declaration stated, "We reject the false doctrine that there are areas of our life in which we would not belong to Jesus Christ, but to other lords, areas in which we do not need justification and sanctification through him." Therefore, as churches, we cannot, must not withdraw from public life, but we are called to engage humbly and courageously and prophetically. And while every church clearly has a call to minister and witness in its own country, we must also resist the temptation to restrict our vision and fall subject to a national or even nationalist narrowing of our vision, rather than play a full part in Europe and the wider world. And so the Conference of European Churches emerged from the fragmented and divided Europe of the 1940s and 50s. The hope of CEC's founders was that churches, inspired by Christian values, could become instruments for peace and understanding throughout a very wounded continent. One way in which CEC is carrying this forward today is in our Pathways to Peace programme, which I'm proud to say Katerina is leading. Yesterday, His Holiness Philotheos spoke of Christian values being ecumenical and always human. Key Christian values for our engagement in Europe are justice and the rule of law, rather than what we see so often, the rule of the richest and the most powerful. Grounded in the Imago Dei, our fundamental belief in the human dignity of every person, our call for justice leads us to advocate for all those who are vulnerable, for minorities, and in the European context, this is particularly relevant regarding migration, people trafficking, and victims of war. Of course, Christian values spell out variously in detail. We disagree among ourselves, even within our respective denominations, and disagreement, properly handled, is creative and fruitful. At our best, thanks to the reconciling spirit of Christ, which is a spirit of peace, we disagree respectfully and never lose sight of that much larger perspective of the common good. The loss of recognition of Christian values in society can also be described as the loss of a meta-narrative. As human beings, we want to belong, and where that meta-narrative goes missing, we lose meaning and purpose, causing anxiety and all those phenomena which go with issues of human identity, from mental health problems in the personal sphere to polarizing populism in the public arena. And we know that verbal violence, sooner or later, leads to physical violence, as was demonstrated only last night in Slovakia. Here is a task for the Church, whose God is the God of love, to use its convening power and offer spaces for exchange, where our worries and our concerns and our fears can find expression, and discover that love drives out fear. And we have a story to tell, a story of hope. Christos Anesti. Christian values are best shared within that story, a story of light and life and love of life, stronger than darkness and fear and hatred and exclusion. We at CEC are convinced, and we convene our member churches for this reason. A Europe underpinned by Christian values has to be more than an administrative purveyor or manager of rules, but has its part to play in global politics, protecting and advocating for freedom and justice and peace, and for the protection of the most vulnerable. And for myself, I have this little mnemonic, personally as well as corporately, as churches. It's about letting go, our preoccupation with ourselves. It's about outward looking, seeking out those who are vulnerable. We must be values-led. And finally, eschatologically driven, because we have that meta-narrative to share. L-O-V-E. It's about love, to be fired up by that God of love. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bishop Dagmar, especially for speaking on growing religious illiteracy and the shrinking space for Christianity in the public sphere. For all of us who try to work with the political institutions and make a difference, this is something we feel daily. But also thank you for underlining the convening role of the Church, which is very important to all of us. Now, we really have the great honor and a great privilege to have with us the abbot of the Holy Monastery of Simonos Petra, which is a very famous monastery in the Orthodox world on the Holy Mountain, the very Reverend Archimandrite Eliseos. Welcome.
Your Holiness, Your Eminence, dear co-speakers, dear brethren, having in mind the summary of the goals of this round table and the topic, Christian values and ecclesiastical expression, and having heard the overall context as stated by Mr. Panicos, I would like, in my humble opinion, to clarify the following. The first is this. By reading the term ecclesiastical expression, I view this as the outset of the ontology of the Church. The Church is not the content, the vessel of the world, but it is the content. It is not included in the world, but includes the world. It contains the world, and that explains what shall follow. Secondly, Christian values, whatever their range or content, are the foundations of Europe as we know it and experience it to this date. That is, the Church contains Europe, and the founders of the European community were faithful members of the Church, whichever doctrine they belonged to. In all discussions regarding the future of Europe, which are also being debated here today, all these discussions contain references to those who founded it or affected it, such as the well-known distinguished Schumann, Monet, Malik, Eliot, and many others. Around the time of this conference, on the 9th of May, we celebrate the birth of the European community, and on the 11th of May, we have the birth date of Constantinople also. Allow me to mention just one quote by Eliot, who stated in a very admirable manner, "If you do not wish to have God as part of your civilization, then you will pay for this by God being replaced by imitations of man. You will have to bow down to people such as Hitler and Stalin." That is part of his doctrine and has been verified repeatedly in the past. Now, with regard to the proposals regarding Christian values and objectives, I would like to make the following observation. Let us admit that the Church is facing a problem, the Orthodox Church in our case. Our Church is possibly shrinking. However, it is always present and is adopting the institutional form of all collective entities, since it is part of this world. What it is called upon to do is to balance out its message in any shape or form vis-à-vis the protection of man, of the individual, and the protection of society. Navigating between personal right, individualism, and the harmonious coexistence of mind and society. And this, we must admit, is very difficult to achieve. We want an inclusive society, but this could bring about extensive conflict. The word peace is wonderful, but it is very difficult to hold on to due to the armament programs and war. So, trying to achieve the synthesis, balance between the citizen and society as a community, the freedom of the individual and this harmonious coexistence, an attempt to achieve such a synthesis is embodied in Mount Athos and the community of a monastery which functions as a family. However, this cannot be used as a universal model for all. It is nevertheless an example and an effort to move in this direction. Such a symbiosis, however, needs to be based on principles and values in order to function on a foundation of equality. Equality, however, can also lead to conflict on many occasions. So maybe the word should be equivalence rather than equality. It can, however, function if we have the self-commitment of all members. In the monastery or in this monastic community, equality is replaced by the words acceptance of the other, sacrifice also. It is these words that then, in daily life, acquire an element of vibrancy, tolerance, and duration. And that's why the monasteries of Mount Athos have been in existence for thousands of years, despite any quote-unquote adventures or difficulties they have experienced. However, many values are put forward in society, in politics, amongst politicians and collective being. The balance between one's individual rights and a balanced society can only be found in a minimal self-commitment, and that is precisely where the work of the Church comes in. It is a duty of the parishioners and of the Church to put forward models that will highlight these concepts of having a common origin that we all share wherever we come from. The Church needs to put forward models of coexistence, of self-limitations, because when you restrict yourself, you limit yourself, then you always need to justify your actions. Sacrifice, service, these are the key concepts, starting from the members of the Church and the entities of the Church along its history. And Christianity, as an institution and a human bond, has repeatedly made mistakes in the past that it has paid for dearly. But it has always held on to and still continues to do so in order not to be misled and lack its orientation, so that it can continue to play a positive role in the world. And that's what we all desire, as expressed repeatedly here. So there are some characteristics that I'd like to mention in this context. I will choose 3 or 4. The first, the Church should not relativize its truths as revealed by Christ and shaped by tradition. Church is an immense sea. It accepts and supports human weakness to the end. Christ says, Christ emptied himself to his death on the cross. That is the example set by the Church of being void vis-à-vis the world without relativizing its truth. This ontology of the Church is not changed because times change or balance is changed. That is the first thing I'd like to point out. Secondly, the Church does not want to become a universal religion. It never did, because then it will be a dictatorship, a totalitarian regime. There is no universal religion, because that would lead to fundamentalism. And make certain figures, as mentioned earlier, appear isolated, expressing their views on a variety of issues in a monologue that leads to doubt and questioning. Third, Church does not want to become an all-encompassing power in the world, because the Church has no power. Where will it find it? It has no riches. It has no weapons or processes. No such instruments to use. Humility is the key at the core of its being. Since its establishment on the earth, and this, otherwise, it is led to secularization. The Church does not want to and cannot be an obstacle to secularization. We have with us the Dean of the Faculty of Theology with us today, and he provided a different definition on another occasion to the word secularization. Secularize the Church now, today. Well, I shall go into it in a couple of minutes. After all, how could this be done? How could the Church stop secularization? With what means and why? Secularization is increasing rather than decreasing, whatever the risk put forward by the various institutions. Many institutions, not only ours, are raising the alarm concerning these risks, but secularization is not stopping. We see the terms nation, homeland, tradition, faith, religion. And these are used in order to highlight the failure of the Church on many occasions. What is the Church doing about this or that? We do not have that many people. Where are all the capable people gone? What is the Church doing about this, many ask. Well, as I mentioned earlier, this is a success, actually, for the Church, because Church's mission means mission. And that is at the core of its experience and its life. Church pays testament to life, a life that is not lost in the present but has a future. Mount Athens is called perennial. Thousands of years now, we have started the second millennium of Mount Athens, the third millennium of Christianity. Life is even longer, however, because it aims to eternity. When we speak about intervening in political life, what is needed is a synthesis with the life of the people, the citizens, politics, politicians, in a different way, through service that enhances life by giving an answer to specific problems such as unemployment, exploitation, through solidarity, by tackling disease, etc. We need to find all the ways to do these, all these new elements that will bring forth new life. And I'm speaking not theoretically, but experientially. When people have this contact with people wherever they are, at Mount Athens, in their parishes, through associations and social groups, one can see practically how this can actually take place. In order to achieve all this, we are based on two axes which were mapped out by the Apostle of the Nations 2,000 years ago. The first axis is to avoid a co-formulation. Do not adapt to the mentality of the people, he says. Rather, secularize them. What I mean by this, turning people towards what is good. And only in this way you will be able to distinguish between what is actually good. For them and for others. Secondly, that Apostle Paul says that I am free of everything, with no dependence on anyone. And that is why I can also be a servant to all. I made myself a servant to all in order to be able to win over as many as possible. So I imitated others in order to become one of them. I became an invalid in order to live amongst them. I became a slave in order to live amongst them. He was a realist with a modern romanticism, as we see in many of his texts. Dear brethren and fathers, our service, the service of the Church, the ecclesiastical expression and what churches can offer service worldwide is not only a technical issue. It is also an issue that is deeply anthropological and theological. And if we resolve this question within us, in practice and experientially, then we'll be able to bear the fruit of our efforts. And those of us who do this will be able to leave their mark in this world. And let me end with, on an optimistic note, there is time to do this. There is a future, as stated by Nicholas Bedzikis. We had an event in his memory, and he stated that in this absolute time that is eternal, what is lost to us today belongs always to those who believe, and we will find this. And we believe when we enter this sacrament of belief and practice. That will be our great victory. Finally, one optimistic message for all people. What is stated by Father Vasilios in his latest book, the former very reverend of the monastery of Ivira, saying that the greatest blessing of God is that man cannot be cooped up within secular systems which are governed and directed by people. Thank you.
Many thanks to Elder Eliseos for this hopeful reflection, and especially for speaking to us on the challenge of balancing between the protection of the individual person and their rights, and the protection of the peaceful and harmonious coexistence of society. Now, from one monastic community, I would like to move to another, and I would like to welcome Sister Manuela Scheiba, who is also professor of the Faculty of Theology of the Anselmianum University in Rome, and she's speaking to us on behalf of COMECE. Sister, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, dear brothers and sisters. In the final phrase of his essay on moral theology, under the title After Virtue, written in 1981, the Scottish philosopher Alistair MacIntyre stated that we are waiting for a new St. Benedict. St. Benedict's greatness lies in having made possible the founding of monasteries centered on prayer, study, and work, in which and around which communities in a period of social and cultural obscurity could not only survive but develop. The development of Benedictine monasticism over a period of many centuries is identical with the history of European culture and civilization, with its ecclesiastical and political history. Benedictine and later Cistercian monks and nuns were at the origin not only of a spiritual religious movement that would forever mark Europe, but also of a cultural, economic, and social movement so profound and vast that the formation of the European continent was permanently influenced by their presence and action. The rule of St. Benedict and Benedictine monks and nuns were and are European and global players. Benedict lived in a time of the collapsing Roman Empire, a time of war, starving, devastation, and the migration of peoples. He had no idea that Pope Pius XII would hail him as the father of Europe, for he inspired in the peoples of this continent that loving care of order and justice that forms the foundation of true society. Pope Paul VI named St. Benedict patron saint of Europe in 1964 in Monte Cassino. In this proclamation, the Pope particularly emphasized the unification of peoples based on the common Christian faith. In the Europe of today, we see a situation which has many parallels to the world inhabited by St. Benedict. Christian values that have vanished, deteriorated, or weakened. As a consequence of this, there's quite a lot of intolerance, lack of concern for the weak, the vulnerable, extremism, prejudice, and war. These phenomena were all part of the context within which Benedictine communities grew in the past centuries. St. Benedict responded positively and practically to human needs, which were not too dissimilar to the needs the European societies experience today. One of the key charisms of St. Benedict was and is monastic hospitality. Benedict's genius for organization, coupled with generosity of resources, is a pattern that still today is a way through which the church and every monastery as a small church can endeavor to promote Christian values. Benedict's rule and Benedictine monastic life have had a lasting impact. To this day, there are about 6,500 Benedictine monks and 13,000 sisters or nuns living in Benedictine monasteries all over the world. As also other colleagues have stated already, in Western societies today, we are becoming more and more individualistic. Everything that is organized collectively seems to be in crisis today somehow. Political parties, trade unions, associations, churches, and even democracy. In Benedictine monasteries, people of different generations, age, character, upbringing, education, family background, and nationality live together respectfully, lovingly, forgivingly for a lifetime. This in itself is a message that goes out to all people who come as guests or tourists to our monasteries. The media, newspapers, television, websites, YouTube channels, etc., also help to remind people of Christian monastic values and society, or to make them known for the first time in a non-believing environment. 80% of the population of the former East Germany and the state of Brandenburg, where our monastery is located, doesn't belong to any religion, 80% in Brandenburg. Christian values are not well known in former communist countries like the former East Germany. The Benedictine Abbey in Alexanderdorf near Berlin, where I am living for more than 30 years, joined forces with other European Benedictine monasteries 2 years ago to form the European Benedictine Congregation of the Resurrection. This new European community includes 11 monasteries, female monasteries, from Spain, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Lithuania, Sweden, and Germany. We see and experience ourselves as a community that transcends all national affiliations and borders. Wherever they are, Benedictine monasteries are spiritual centers that also attract people who don't normally go to church, who even do not know anything about the Christian faith. What attracts them is open-minded hospitality, silence, space for reflection, a simple lifestyle, and the possibility of an informal dialogue with other guests of the monastery, or a dialogue with a sister or a brother of the monastery. These conversations may also touch on questions of politics, economics, social life, education and upbringing, and environmental protection, etc. But it is first and foremost the way we live. We work and pray together as a Christian community that has an impact on people, that makes them reflect on Christian values and often also makes them decide in favor of a different, a Christian lifestyle, and sometimes they also ask for baptism in our monastery. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Shaiba, especially for keeping the time, being very faithful. It was really good that you took us back to the patristic roots, speaking to us about the rule of St. Benedict and monastic hospitality, and emphasizing monastic life and the life of silence and prayer as a way of transformation of society. That's very important for us to keep in mind. I would like now to move to our next speaker, who is Dr. Niki Papageorgiou, Professor of Sociology of Religion here at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, and former professor of mine. Professor Papageorgiou, you have the floor.
Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Σεβασμιότατη.
Thank you. Reverend Fathers, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Christ is risen. It's an honor for me to be a member of this panel, and let me thank the committee and touch on 4 points. First, the Church, like all religion, has an expression which aims at revealing its identity and to communicate with the receivers of its message, together with other aspects such as the significance of the world. This is dictated by the institutional organization of the ecclesiastical authority, and this, in a sense, shows the process of reaching out to the world and communicating with it. And this is within a framework of historical and social conditions. The Church is a historical institution, being the body of Christ. It is shaped by the world, and the word it produces, and which transmits its value system, is defined by cultural and social conditions. If the message is the same throughout the centuries, the means change, and frequently new ways are used, and they change from society to society according to the message of the revelation, the encyclicals of bishop, sermons, or articles in newspapers, digital or printed, and social networking are written by certain people for certain people. They are understood within a certain framework in time and space. And for this reason, the word of the Church can be very renovative. Otherwise, sometimes it conserves and maintains the order of the world. But the second aspect of renovating shows how adaptable the Church is to space and time, and its flexibility in reaching out to the world, but also the danger that we confuse the Church with ideologies. In recent years, the expressive authority of the Church moves between processing and reproducing traditional ways of living, and embarrassment on things like secularization. It somehow downgrades its an innovative aspect in favor of a maintenance aspect, and it maintains and preserves something which has nothing to do with God, but it's simply the acquis of man. And it's frequently difficult to overcome the injustices of a traditional society and build a narrative of justice and equality among men. Contextual theology, such as liberation theology or feminist theology, are in the margins of modern Orthodox theology, and were downgraded in favor of patristic texts which underline the dogma, the doctrine. However, unity of the congregation and of mankind is in the very roots of the Church. Who will save us from saviors? In other words, who speaks of the church or who speaks on behalf of the church? The weakness in inability of the church to express its message, we have a religious populism which finds fertile grounds in the phobias, the ambiguities of the lay congregations. Official church speech frequently identified with extremist fundamentalist beliefs, and frequently we have these so-called saviors, self-appointed saviors, who frequently change the very expression of the church, and this has to do with the digital power of networks, which is not frequently found in the communication of the church and the people. We are in a transition period, in a different direction from the times of Saint Constantine. We need to have a new expressive dynamics to deal with meta-Christian or de-Christianized reality, so that one can contribute to the common good with the wealth of its experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Papageorgiou. This has been a very critical but constructive reflection on how the churches approach the big challenges of globalization, secularization, and modernity. And I'm eager to hear how the Assembly feels about all this.